Evaluate. Always evaluate evidence critically, said a wise man of the land of fools to one of his students. Now I shall test you on feasibility. Suppose I were to say, climb up that moonbeam. What would you answer? I would say, I might slip on the way up. Wrong. You should have thought of chopping footholds with an axe. In due season. Why, a visiting cleric asked John Fishan Khan, do critics and detractors make more noise than those who value the path? You can answer the question yourself, said the Khan, if you find the answer to this. A shouting boy is throwing stones at a tree. People stop and watch him. A wise man passes by and notes that the tree is one which bears delicious fruit. The boy is completely absorbed in his amusement. The onlookers are looking only at what the boy is doing. The wise man is seeing the inwardness of the tree, which will only be manifested for the others in its due season. Radios. I was once in a certain country where the local people had never heard the sounds emitted from a radio receiver. A transistorized set was being brought to me, and while waiting for it to arrive, I tried to describe it to them. The general effect was that the description fascinated some and infuriated others. A minority became irrationally hostile about radios. When I finally demonstrated the set, the people could not tell the difference between the voice from the loudspeaker and someone nearby. Finally, like us, they managed to develop the necessary discrimination of ear, such as we have. And when I questioned them afterwards, all swore that what they had imagined from descriptions of radios, however painstaking, did not correspond with the reality. The Young Sufi. An old man visited a young Sufi, sitting among a group of friends. The other visitors were scornful when he said, "All my life I have hoarded money, and I have spent no time in reflecting upon man and his inner reality." The Sufi said, "Each man does with what he has, what he can." "Yes," said the ancient miser, "and since I do not know any other way to honor you, whom I now recognize, I give you this. It is a gem which I bought at the goldsmith's. I paid for it every penny which I have saved these past 60 years. It is the best thing he had in his shop. I am too old to change, but each man speaks in his own language." The young Sufi stood up and started to rend his clothes. He said to the assembled company, "You are thinking that this man is materialistic and lacks knowledge. But he is parting with the most precious thing he has, because of his nobility of spirit, not mine. From this day on, this man is your teacher, and I shall go into seclusion." The Magical Book. One day an English historian discovered among some books which he had bought, one which dealt with magical spells. He put the book aside, but one day he thought, "Magic is absolute nonsense, but wouldn't it be remarkable if a historian, from the best possible motives, could make use of the spells to project himself into the past? He would be able to learn the real facts of history." And so it was that our historian found himself in Britain during the Norman Conquest. When he had lived there for a time, he pronounced the magic word for returning to his own time. Not long afterwards he gave a lecture on Britain in Norman times. He was soon deprived of his university post because he insisted upon making allegedly factual claims without citing his literary sources, and alleging that all historically established facts about Norman Britain were incorrect. His library was sold up, and the Book of Magic found its way to the Middle East. It was bought by a man named Mansour, who was as attracted as the English historian by the space-time formula. He projected himself back to the taking of Constantinople by Mohammed the Conqueror, just as a matter of interest. Since in his community the practice of magic was considered to be undesirable, he told nobody about his adventures. But being only human, he could not resist using his new information. One day he said, "It strikes me as curious that the Muslims wear the fez as a headgear indicating their religion, when it was formerly worn only by Christians in Byzantium. And as for the crescent and star emblem, it was used by the Christians whom the Muslims were fighting." The ecclesiastical authorities in his country declared him a heretic, and nobody would talk to him until he retracted every word, which he soon did. He threw the book out of his window, and it was picked up by a beggar, who sold it for a scrap of bread to the owner of a bookstall. The book was written in English, and a foreigner who knew the language bought it for next to nothing on his way back to the West. This man, whom we shall call Martin, became fascinated by the very same passage in the book as had interested his predecessors. But being a good Catholic, he took it to a cardinal of his acquaintance and asked him about it. The cardinal said, "My son, this is a grievous sin, and such an object as this is an abomination to all believers. Shun it." Martin was appropriately grateful for this guidance, and he left the book with the cardinal. Some time later, sitting in his study, the cardinal pondered, "After all, a man of my position is well able to defend himself against supernatural forces. I can see the dangers in sending oneself backwards to a time where things are not what they seem to us to be from where we are now. I will therefore, as an experiment, make up a special formula." After a great deal of thought, he recited the spell to take him back in time and space, like this: "Let me be projected back to a time and to a place where things will not interfere with my beliefs." He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again he found that he was in a cave. He heard sounds like those made by people just outside. Adjusting his gorgeous robes, the cardinal stepped to the entrance of the cave. Assembled in a small hollow in front of him were a few dozen men and women, clad in skins, holding clubs and with long matted hair. They grunted as he appeared, and gave out shrill cries, apparently of welcome. "Friends," said the cardinal, "I do not know where I am, but I can see that you are in need of guidance. I have come to speak to you of the most important thing that you have ever heard." But all he could elicit by way of a reaction were grunts and squeals. By the time that he had realized that he had journeyed back several 100,000 years, he also found that he had forgotten the word which had to be pronounced in order to return him to his own time. The book has now been sold, and has started on its travels again, and now lies on the shelf of a second-hand dealer, awaiting its next buyer. It is just as well for most people that almost everyone regards such books as nonsense. The Man. A Bektashi dervish approached a certain bishop and said, "I have heard of a young man who harangues crowds, advocating their breaking the law, claims supernatural connections, performs miracles, and contradicts himself." "Enough," said the bishop. "He shall be tried, charged with blasphemy and upsetting public order. If he does not recant, he may be put to death as a heretic and corrupter. Just tell me his name, and I shall arrange the rest." "I wish you could realize how impressed I am by your competence," said the Bektashi. "His name is Jesus." Psychoanthropological Report. There is a country where all the people are eccentric for part of the time. They are not at all like the human beings whom we know. They train groups of people to behave in certain systematic manners. When this has been done, they elicit that behavior and all its surrounding actions by applying the necessary stimuli. Those people who show the greatest efficiency in training, the best indoctrination subjects, are given rewards, just as are laboratory animals who successfully reproduce their conditioning plan. But at this point, unlike us, these people become quite confused in the most systematic manner. The trainers themselves, instead of saying, "Another experiment successfully completed," start to admire and worship the heroes. They set them up as inspirers, actually claiming that what they did was spontaneous. The result is that anything really spontaneous is punished and disliked, and cannot survive in their society. But as they have the word left over, they use it for non-spontaneous things. This is all such a pity, since they are at times very pleasant people to be with, having far greater capacities than this self-deceptive one. And theirs is, to many visitors, a beautiful country. Because of the drawback just described, of course, most people who do not have to go there avoid it. They become irritated, noting that the citizenry of this place actually have scientists who carry out clinical and experimental work on animals and humans without noting similar effects in everyday society. This, they claim, is the experimenting and conditioning. But what they do among themselves, something precisely the same, after laboratory hours, that is not. But are the results of the scientists' indoctrination processes secret? Good gracious, no. They are printed by the million in popular books and very widely read. We are lucky to live in our kind of world. Frivolous. A prince said to a scholar, "The speech of yonder Sufi is so frivolous and so general that I do not believe that he can be a man of sincerity." The scholar said, "O Emir of Sheikhs, know that there are 3 forms of deep knowledge. The deep knowledge unknown to any, the deep knowledge given by the results of complex speech, and the deep knowledge conveyed by seemingly frivolous means. One jest from the lips of that Sufi has made 100 saints, while other men of serious mien and threatening talk have succeeded in making corpses. A goblet of the water of life was once handed to a man. He refused to drink because the container did not please him by its outward shape. If you are a man of shape, why do you talk about depth?" Stop Og now. So the great discovery has come at last. The arch-rebel, blasphemer, jack-of-all-trades called Og has essayed a new attention-attracting move. His last wonderful piece of advice, it will be remembered, was carry 5 things at once. Instead of making several journeys, make one. The priesthood, as any intelligent man could have foreseen, soon put an end to that. And of course it was only a matter of time before Og came up with something else. If the great totem had intended us to behave like children, to fill our arms with objects in fumbling disarray, it would have been laid down in the magical chants. We know, as the great chief hoodoo so sagely ruled, that it is more dignified, more apposite, more right to carry one thing at a time. But we are becoming accustomed to Og. Innovator, he may call himself. But what innovation is there, even assuming the far from established thesis that innovation is good, for there is evidence to the contrary, in the mere repetition, under another guise, of rebellion and heresy? Yesterday, as I have said, it was carry more than one object at a time and save time. Today, the puerile pattern is repeated, though the undertones of challenge are more sinister. Today, friends, it is, I can make fire without rubbing 2 sticks together. Formerly, of course, no decent man or woman would have allowed such an appalling sequence of words to pass his lips, even in order to refute them. But these are changed times, enlightened times, progressive times. stirring days which will ever be remembered as an age in which no forward-looking shaman, no truly thinking juju man, flinched from facing evil and casting its very obscenities back into its fetid mouth. Making fire by another method. Make fire at all without having been initiated by the great fetish in a ceremony of such sanctity that it can be performed only 4 times a year. Make fire any time you like? I would not blame you if your minds reeled at the very recital of this story. But it is not the reeling minds, surely, which will mend the matter. No, it is cold logic, calm and effective thought, careful refutation on impeccable grounds. Let us therefore calmly and logically, as well as from a very proper human conscience, examine these claims, outrageous and devoid of sense, as they must surely appear to most of us. The first consequence of the absurdity proposed would be that all beauty, all mystery, all that is fine in the basic sanctions of morality would disappear from our lives. On fire, the rarity and sublimity of fire, for which lives have been given, for which people have suffered, and for which many more are prepared to endure the greatest hardships, on the rarity and sublimity of fire ultimately depend all higher values. What, in a word, is more sacred than fire? What would become of the enchanting oath, "May fire strike me from above if I lie"? Fire, instead of being respected, would soon come to be despised. No longer afraid of fire, people would lie, would cheat, would kill. If, stretching credulity to its limits and producing, as a purely hypothetical exercise, a nonsense situation, the warmth of fire were to be available to all, how could its nurturing aesthetic, its divinely benevolent mercy, be valued for its scarcity? Today people win and earn the right to fire. They are given it from the temples as a reward. Those who are rightly denied it are all around us, blue and chattering with cold, object lessons to us all, as they, as a punishment for evil, have a foretaste of the greater punishment beyond. And here, dear friends, we may very well have uncovered the real, the astoundingly audacious motivation of the evil Og. As the generations have passed, more and more people have, again I say rightly, been denied fire. Naturally, they think of little else. And then Og appears. He says, "I can gain power over the people by promises. What do they want? Fire. So I shall promise them fire." Do you not now see how, at one blow, Og can strike at the very roots of civilization? If he promises fire, the disaffected will do anything for him. If indeed he can make it, he destroys society. There would be nothing to live for or to die for. If he cannot make it, he can destroy, through his minions, the makers of divine fire any time he wishes, out of sheer excitement and fanaticism. Og says that we are conservative, timid, and hypocritical as a society. Is it conservative to range ever further in search of wild bison? Is it timid to protect the finest feelings known to man? Is it hypocritical to say, "You are trying to undermine us and are not offering any alternative to what you take away"? To turn fire into a slave instead of a master, to make it a matter of switching on and off, how can this be good or lead anywhere at all? No, my friends, I do not like Og. I do not like the way he talks. I do not like the way he looks. I do not think it any coincidence that his forebears came from a different tribe. I do not believe Og or believe in anything that his supporters say about him. Can you conceive a world in which Og and his kind use fire, setting the forests alight as if they were the lightning god himself? Do you want a community in which the most progressive elements in society are called cowards and play-actors, their values assailed, their objects declared irrelevant, and, above all, by Og and his kind? And finally, in lighter vein, so that the utter absurdity of the whole matter may become apparent even to the most obtuse, is Og a second Glug the Great, that the whole world should listen to him? Has Og taken any part in our own progressive activities that we should trust him through knowing his opinions and beliefs? Is he respected by any person whose opinions we value? No. Og is distinctly an enemy, and it is always the cleverest and most dangerous enemies who pose as benefactors. Let, therefore, the call go out. Stop Og now!